Hey, so good evening. It is Tuesday, the 15th of February, 2022, and I'm here with Seamus O'Milliner or Jim Miller. We're going to have a chat tonight, just a review at the point that we all are finding ourselves now after the last 2 years of revealings that we've all had in various different ways since COVID was introduced to invite us all to examine who we are, what our values are, where our weaknesses are, what our strengths are, and to start seeing the world through different eyes. So I think whereas COVID can be seen as a plague on the world, I think on another way of looking at it has been a great opportunity for all of us to really test our mettle, so to speak. So Jim, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself as you would like to introduce yourself. And it may be a little bit about how we met.
Well, I suppose at this stage now, I'm such a big fan of technology that it's probably a major accident that we ever met. Now, we met through Facebook, and there was a discussion going on amongst yourself and others about sovereignty. And I realized that you had a take on sovereignty that was more, was deeper by a mile than anything that anybody else had. And I wanted to meet you to get to the bottom of that. Now, I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it, but having said that, we've had a lot of discussions about sovereignty, and I think we have a handle on it. You have anyhow, and I think we have a handle on it. And it's like a lot of other things. It's fantastic in its own right as a concept, but it's also one of these things that a lot of people half understand, and they go off on tangents here and there trying to fathom out. And I mean, we have all sorts of things going on at the moment about the sovereignty of the nation, which Micheál Martin dismisses. And then there's economic sovereignty, which doesn't exist when you have financial slavery and all of that. So it's a whole big book. And there are many aspects to sovereignty, but that's how we met through Facebook. And it has been a very interesting experience, let me tell you. The road from 67 to 69 has been very interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I am fascinated every day to realize how little most of us know, and to what extent we have been blinded from real knowledge and real truth all our lives, and not just our lives, but right through, back through history. So much has been spun at us, and people have been so farmed, for the want of a better term, that they have been slaves to certain entities forever and ever. And part of that slavery is making certain that you cannot know the things that you are automatically entitled to know as a human being.
Okay.
And we have been blinded from that in so many ways. It's just extraordinary, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still struggling to come to terms with that, because I wouldn't consider myself any form of an Einstein. I certainly wasn't top of the class ever at anything. Maybe kicking football, I could kick a free 80 yards. Maybe that was about my biggest forte or greatest forte. But if I can fathom out what I've fathomed out, well, then so can practically everybody else. And I've always appreciated the fact that everybody brings something different to the party. And just because, you know, the football team is probably the best example of all. With 15 players, you can't have all full backs or full forwards or centre field players. You have to have a mix, and that's what makes up the team. And the skills that one guy has, if you have somebody who, I mean, it has been proven time and time again, you have somebody to kick the penalty, but you have to have somebody to get the penalty first. And so I have always appreciated that, the simple fact that everybody has a contribution to make. And as of today, to me, the biggest single issue in the world is to re-empower people to be the best they can be and to be what they're entitled to be. Now, I remember Claire Cullinan used to talk about empowerment, but it's far more even than I think Claire ever imagined.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I think that's where the critical changes that have to be made, self-empowerment and the empowerment of every man, woman and child, demands practically that the boat of life be turned around to go the very opposite direction, because everything that is happening is about literally making mankind a slave to a stupid computer or a smartphone or some other sort of a gizmo that's wired into your brain through these 1,000 EMF balloons that they're floating around the sky or whatever, or 1 million of them actually.
Take that, you started off there talking about the word sovereign, okay? And one of the things I love, there's a lot of things I love about you, but your beautiful fluency in Ireland, which I believe is in Irish, is a language that is so much more closer to the spirit of human nature than English is. But we're governed by the way words are used. And on the word sovereign, it comes from the old French word meaning souverain, and ultimately came from the Latin superanus, meaning above. And roles of sovereignty, like talking about being the chief, the ruler, etc. I would remove in my language now, as I'm becoming more and more aware of different usages of the words, I think authentic should be replacing the word sovereign. Now, people have been made terrified to be authentic. And we are consistently, our attention is being brought outside for approval, outside to be allowed to do the most basic things like even breathe. And to me, probably more powerful words that I would say to people is become your authentic self. But what that means if you are your authentic self is that you have to be personally responsible. And you have to have an evaluation, especially in these days. If I am my authentic self, it's fairly clear that that could go against what we're being told to be for some form of false sense of security, in which they keep changing the goalposts. Or you stand in your authentic self at the expense of social acceptance, or being penalized, or being rejected by your family and friends, or losing your job, or being imprisoned. So we've come to a crossroads in humanity with the invitation from COVID, which is, who are you? What do you value? What are you value? What are your values? And actually, fundamentally, what are you willing to die for? Now, if people are being asked to make a decision like that, and from the time they were born, they were never, ever given a sense of being enough or home or safe, then they may not have a reference point to judge from. But if you know who you are and you know the cost of not being that person is too high, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, well, then you have a reference point. But all a lot of people see is the cost of being authentic is external approval, remuneration, or acknowledgement. So I think humanity at large are lacking the remembering of who they are because of the utter distraction on purpose that was been given, so that they'd move away and they would follow their desires and forget their needs. What do you think about that?
You've always been making the point that the best way to destroy people is to give them everything they want. And I'm realizing the value of that comment. I remember it's over 30 years ago, a particular gentleman who was in the FCA. That's the Force Cousin to O'Toole, for those who don't know. But I remember having a discussion with him one day about something you just mentioned. What would you be prepared to die for? Now, historically in Ireland, there would have been a very strong sort of sense of Irishness, and you can go back through many centuries of revolution and war and call it what you like. But I remember saying to the particular individual one day that we had arrived at a point, this would have been about 1990, where if you called out 100 people and asked them what would they consciously be prepared to die for, I said to them, the chances are that 95% of them wouldn't have a clue. They would not be able to say this or that or whatever. And for some reason or other, I think in my lifetime, that sense of pure worth in the individual has to some degree been zapped. Yeah. And it has been zapped by all sorts of modernisms, which make people feel inadequate, incompetent, and forever and ever looking up at the stars. And by the stars, I don't mean the things in the skies. I'm talking about these celebrities and the
Your internet went there a moment, Jim. Can you just repeat? You were explaining what stars you were talking about. And Jim's internet has gone there. So this is the beauty of dealing with the technology, which is not something anyone really wishes to have these wonderful conversations, but we do our best. Hang on. Okay, so sorry, Jim, your internet went down there. You were talking about defining what you're talking about, people looking out at the stars.
Yes, I mean, that has been highly cultivated, and it's cultivated through all forms of marketing.
Yes.
And like the obsession with wanting more and having to have this because somebody else has it, and another holiday and another this and another that. And the lottery is part of that sort of psychology that creates the illusion that if you had the winnings of the lottery, it would fix everything, when in actual fact, the lottery would destroy most people.
Exactly.
Okay. You know, they just would not be able to cope with that. And because it's outside. Yeah.
I think the reason for that is as well, is that in order to follow desires as an end in itself, you'll never achieve fulfillment, because desires are never ultimately fulfilled. And that's why millionaires want to become billionaires and trillionaires. We can see that. And when they get to that point, then there is nothing that they can't buy except happiness. And they tend to get envy, which I believe is the foundation of evil in the world. And now they're acting in a godlike manner. They're actually envious of nature itself. They're envious of love. They're envious of life. And they're envious of consciousness. And all of their money is being put in to try to control that. However, there is a premise that they go by, which is been almost proven experimental in the last 2 years in Technicolor, which is that phrase mundus vult decepi ergo decepiatur, which in Latin it means the world wants to be deceived, so let it be deceived. And it's almost they're trying that out. And I think one of the things it appears is that people are addicted, Lily, to the lie. They're actually addicted because a lie, and the lie gives them an opportunity not to have to experience the responsibility of their own decisions. So they've almost taken away our choice and then said you're not responsible for anything. And then they have played a game of carrot and stick in either rewarding or punishing people, and then moving them into an addiction of hope, which then creates despair. And in that point, they're able to hemorrhage literally everybody's life force and energy. And by these techniques of understanding that they have of how to tempt, how to frighten, how to encourage people's hunger for more and progress and quicker and easier, more seductive, they can actually seduce them out of their own needs into this hunger. And I think that globally what we're seeing is an accumulation of that at the moment.
Well, you're also seeing a very greedy bunch of people, of millionaires and billionaires, telling us all how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to. And I mean, I don't know who it was told the joke about the guy who met the multimillionaire. I don't know who told it. And the multimillionaire was going on about all the things he was going to do and wanted to do, and and the guy who had nothing said to him, well, it's like this now, I have something that you'll never have, and you can't buy it. And the millionaire said to him, and what's that? Enough. And in the redesign of society, the billionaires have to be zapped, and people have to accept in principle the term enough. Now, and that doesn't mean that one shouldn't have a little bit more than the other, or it doesn't mean that everybody is ultimately equal. I mean, if somebody's able to run 100 meters in 10 seconds, doesn't mean that everybody else has to be able to run 100 meters in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
No. And I mean, if somebody is a good painter, isn't that fantastic? They mightn't be able to run 100 meters in half an hour, but they could still be able to paint. They might have no legs to run with, but they're entitled to be able to paint because they're able to paint. So let them paint. Yeah. And I go back to what I said. Everybody has something to offer, and none of us are better or worse than anybody else. And I do believe that what COVID probably is offering us more than anything else in the world that we live in, where we can actually communicate worldwide. We can send a text to China and they'll be back and you get a reply in half a minute or whatever. But in that context, if we are clear enough in what the message to mankind is and should be, well, then I do believe that we can turn the boat around and take out these and dismiss these billionaires who think that they have to have another billion and another billion and another billion, and that we have to stay screwing ourselves in order to feed the bear. I don't know whether that makes any sense or not. But
billionaires, I don't think billionaires make a billion. They're given a billion and they take a billion. and they are only the external personification of the amount of unnecessary spending and pouring in of energy into external things. And with all of that, as people chase desires, they absolutely lose any idea of what they need. And I don't really think the billionaires are as much of a, well, it's interrelated, but it's like a symbiotic effect. There are 7 billion people and there's not that many billionaires. But the balance of numbers is incredible. I mean, why are they so strong? They're the personification of the fact that people have lost the run of themselves. And they are masters at tempting. However, to achieve what they have achieved in the last 2 years or the last 2,000 years, accumulatively, generationally, they knew one thing. And what they knew is because it's innate in them. They knew how to stir envy in people. And I think the world is split into the people who are envious and people who are grateful. And I think gratitude comes from deep within, connected to a consciousness which we are all connected to. And envy comes from something external, which is almost an egregore in itself. And there are many different ways that mythology and ancient books have talked about this, the Pathonis, the Greek word for envy of the archons. So it's almost like each person is in the middle. There's envy being directed and tempted, and then there's gratitude. But because we are facing outwards all the time with our attention outwards, it's getting harder and harder to feel the gratitude. But gratitude is so precious and should be cultivated to a much bigger degree than envy is being cultivated. They have had to spend millions and billions to bribe, cajole, and create the illusions so that people became mesmerized, looking outwards, and forgot who they are inside. And we are at life and death. Literally, we are at life and death at the moment, choices. But death can come in another form, which is shame. And the thing that we are all trained to avoid is personal shame. But that shame journey inwards, taking personal responsibility, is actually probably the most purifying and alchemizing and liberating thing ever. Because especially in Ireland, Irish people have been trained to shame anybody who stands up and says the uncomfortable thing for a long, long time. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say you're absolutely right. I mean, for example, in 1916 and thereafter for a short while, when the guys from the revolutionary movement, some of them were being sent to prison in England, and they were spat at by local people when they were going out on the boats. They were literally spat at. And within no time at all, then they became heroes. But there is a culture there that I generally refer to it as the Craine Killa mentality.
Can you explain that?
Craine Killa is a book written by Máirtín O'Kine. It was written in Irish and translated into 8 different languages, including Russian. And it's a phenomenal book. Now, it's not an easy book to read. And it was a book written for different purposes, but the primary purpose for which it was written was to store language that was going out of use. But if it did that, that's fine. And it did, because any word that I look up in the book is not in the dictionary either. And that's the reason he put it in the book, was because it wasn't there, it was going out of usage. But T.G. Carr did a dramatization of it, and it's well worth anybody's time looking at it. and the vibrancy of the near bitterness that comes across. And the book is set in the graveyard, in the afterlife, and everybody is living underground as they were. They're all awake and alive and whatever else, and they're talking who's coming next and who came down. I heard your man falling, you know, he's next, and he's over there beside Johnny Joe and Mickey Mouse and whatever else. And it's a fantastic concept of book, but the mentality, there is an aggression there. And I'm not suggesting now that life has to be all lovey-dovey, kind, you know, it's not like that. But I was pretty shocked by the near anger, and certainly the vexatious nature of a lot of the language that was being used. There wasn't an awful lot of politeness involved.
We'll put a link to that at the bottom of this video so people can have a look at what you're talking about. But this anger, and the doctor from Brent, I can't remember his name now, that talked about mass formation that everybody was talking about. And he said that the 4 elements had been cultured in society consciously in order for the mass formation event, which was COVID, which is this like mass hypnosis. And he said a lack of meaning, which I would also say values in people's life. And if you don't know what you're going to die for, then you don't know what your life means. And the second thing was an unnamed, undirected, underlying anger. And the third thing was an unnamed, underlying anxiety. And the fourth thing was a lack of true connection to each other and meaning in one's life. So when COVID then was purposely introduced as a concept or almost a religion, all of a sudden it addressed all of those issues. So people who had this sense of, you know, lack of connection, lack of meaning in their life, COVID became everything. And that's why it was 24/7 COVID. Nothing else mattered. The other thing is that the media carefully managed to direct to any individual that would stand up and question anything. They allowed horrible attacks on those people. So it gave them a way of venting that unnamed anger onto directed targets. And, you know, we were at the other side of that. So it was a phenomenal experience. The third thing was any level of anxiety they had in their life now, it was now called COVID. And the fourth thing was for people who felt disconnected from themselves ultimately and from each other, they belonged now. And there was symbols for that belonging: the masks, the gloves, the washing the hands, the clapping, the dancing to Jerusalem. And the Late Late Show became almost the black mass of this cult. But it has been a phenomenal experience. And for one, I mean, I've never really had to experience what it must be like to be a minority. You know, we were very lucky to be brought up where we were and all of the benefits that we had. And, you know, we lived watching travelers or gay or, you know, different minority groups being bullied. And as much as we would say it was wrong and empathize with them, totally different. This year, the 5 or 6% or whatever numbers, I don't know, became the target of utter anger and hatred, illogical anger and hatred. So I found it was a very, very humbling experience, but there was no way that I could go along with what was happening, knowing what I knew, without actually, I would have made myself ill. And it was an alchemizing year. That's what I would say. And the masks dropped, you know, in talking to people, the amount of coercion, social coercion, economic coercion, family coercion that happened, media coercion, it was phenomenal. But oh my God, how weak and impotent must these billion trillionaires be to have to have paid and bribed and put so much effort into this. But then they must have known more than we did about the global mindset, probably from algorithms or spending patterns or online behavior, that it was the right time to do it.
Yeah,
And
but my question about them is the motivation. Why would they be obsessed with doing what they have been promoting? And I mean, like,
I
as
think
Schwab
the
says,
answer to that is envy, Seamus. They have envy of human spirit. They envy the one thing that they cannot do, which is predict, control, or create consciousness. And ultimately a fear of their own mortality.
I would accept that, but I mean, I wouldn't have been able to say that if it wasn't how you have explained it. And I take that, but in the context of what has happened in the last couple of years, I'm only beginning to become fully aware of the industry that is marketing. And over my lifetime, I can see how the whole marketing industry has absolutely mushroomed into a control mechanism. I mean, it wasn't, it's, before television and before the internet, marketing was innocent enough, but now it is in your face. It doesn't matter what you try to do today. That you're confronted with the marketing industry, and the allied to that then is the obsession with absolute dominance in the so-called capitalist world, which is actually crony capitalism, which is a half sister to communism. But the fact of the matter is that there's an obsession there with, firstly, the marketing industry, and secondly, the response to it. And in some way or other, that has been sort of mandatory in order to achieve what COVID has achieved. People have bought into that, and the mainstream media are part of that. You can call it marketing or you can call it propaganda. Well, they're sisters or brothers.
I think that in the last, they've started to show us the reality of how much lies they've told. And there was, in May, I think, of 2021, an Italian sculptor, for the want of a better word, sold, I don't know how, he sold a sculpture that didn't exist. So there was only a placard explaining the sculpture, the piece of sculpture, and there was nothing there. And he's an Italian guy. His name was, what was it now? It'll come to me now in a minute. But I remember watching that and I thought, okay, this is fascinating now. Somebody is actually paying 18,000 on nothing. And it was the absolute emperor's new clothing that happened. He said, the piece was to be displayed in a special room in a space free from obstruction, with like 150 by 150, with special lighting and climate control. And it was nothing. People are buying bananas duct taped to a wall for 150,000. And it's a really sad indictment. But on the other hand, those who are controlling this ideology, and it is an ideology, and let's get this clear, they at the top have decided that the only place they can go is to recreate their own metaverse, their own universe of illusions, which has moved away from what they believe to be the cumbersome limitations of the human body, which is ridiculous because there is no technology in the world that can beat the human body. And they consider 90% of humanity to be useless meat eaters, to be less than deserving of breathing air on this earth. And they haven't made a secret of it. And when I saw the figures rising for people who were, you know, consenting to go to trusting these people in their modification of their entire existence, according to what benefits they were being sold or the fears that they were being encouraged to have, it was matching the numbers that the billionaires and trillionaire ideologists of the transhumanist, the neo-Gnostic transhumanists believe that these people are not human, they're subhuman. And it was quite a terrifying thing to watch how many people they were able to bring on board.
I agree with you in one sense, but I have a slightly different take on the fact that, and I don't want to be too judgmental about other people because they are who they are, but as I see the situation, I'm always reminded about the song. I'm trying to think of your man who wrote the song. He wrote the Cats in the Cradle, but he had a song about no need to see flowers as any other color except green or red or whatever it was.
Roses are red.
Harry Chapin.
Yeah.
And it's a tremendous song. And people across the world have been told that flowers are red.
Okay, so again, we're having the problem with the internet connection and just here with Seamus having the chats. But I'm going to play the song that he referred to there. I think it's really, really important. And I remember this song when I was younger and it had a lot of effect on me when I heard it. So I'm just going to put it up here.
The little boy went first day of school. He got some crayons and he started to draw. He put the colors all over the paper. All colors was what he saw. And the teacher said, "What you doing, young man?" "I'm painting flowers," he said. She said, "It's not the time for art, young man. And anyway, flowers are green and red. They're the time for everything, young man, and the way it should be done. You've got to show concern for everyone else, or you're not the only one." And she said, "Flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see everyone." The teacher said, "You're sassy, there's ways that things should be, and you'll paint flowers the way they are, so repeat after me." And she said, "Flowers are red, young man, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen." But the little boy said, "There are so many colors in the rainbow, so many colors in the morning sun, so many colors in the flower, and I see everyone." The teacher put him in the corner. She said, "It's for your own like you should. Well, finally he got lonely, tried him up, filled his head, and he went up to the teacher, and this is what he said. And he said, flowers are red, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen. Time went by like it always does, and they moved to another town. And the little boy went to another school. This is what he found. The teacher there was smiling. She said painting should be fun. And there were so many colors in the flower, so let's use every one. But that little boy painted flowers in each rose of green and red. And when the teacher asked him why, this is what he said. And he said, flowers are red, and green leaves are green. There's no need to see flowers any other way than the way they always have been seen.
It's actually quite an emotional song.
It's a wonderful song, and like it explains an awful lot.
Yeah.
You know, and I started writing a book a couple of years ago, and I didn't get very far, but one of the things I wanted to do in it was to write a chapter or two through the eyes of some of the artists that I would have had a particular appreciation for. Because I do believe that artists in general, not exclusively, but have a particular insight into what makes them pretty special. You know, that, you know, that's not an
I believe that's true. And I think coming from artistry and creativity comes from our emotional body, which is connected directly into inspiration and into source. I mean, the very nature of existence is a creative and destructive approach. So I think that the artists, and it's interesting what they did to artists over the years. They hijacked them. Some of them, the most talented ones, they did deals with and basically took over them, and they had to serve something else. And in the last year now, they've just stopped people, you know, it's horrific. But the artists and the creative center that we all have inside us, whether it's, you know, of a fundamental sexual or creation, or our ability to connect into something bigger and be inspired, is something that they're absolutely and utterly crushing. And why I got upset over that song is, I think for my entire life, nobody was ever going to tell me flowers were red only. I got into trouble consistently because I couldn't play the game. But I was, even from a young age, aware of the cost to people who did play the game. I couldn't see the benefits. But certainly I would have been the kid that would have went, no, those flowers are different colors. And there is a knock-on effect of suffering. You know, when the system tells you this is what it is, and you say, actually, no, it's not. Very hard.
I totally agree. And like at some stage in life, most people are some way challenged to stand up for something. And if it transpires that you have nothing to stand up for, you know, there's a sort of a red line issue for everybody.
Yeah.
Or I'd imagine there is, but it's hard to find. Some people, I think, find it hard to identify the red line. And you know, it's pink. It's not really red. It's okay now. We'll move it over there a bit. And
but there's a wonderful video which I'll put the link up to, and it's talking about there's people sitting on a bank in a field, and music begins to play, and one individual gets up and starts to dance, and everybody's looking at them and thinking they're weird or whatever. And then eventually the second individual gets up and starts to dance. And then eventually, now the most important there, some people are inbuilt in them to stand up, but it's the one who stands up beside them that is the important one. Because when there's one person alone, everybody can say, ah, sure, well. So what the system has done is made such a ball of shame around any person that stands up, and created this full sellout media that will attack them, that it stops the second person standing up. And that needs to stop. You don't have to be the massively courageous person who stands up and says no. But at least try and be the second one. And if you can't be the second one, be the third, or at least don't stand with the ones who are attacking the first one. So everyone has got a role in this.
Absolutely.
And you have to know what your role is. But everybody has got power. And over this year, I have witnessed people being bullied, really badly bullied. And the person and the 100 people standing beside will bow their head and won't say anything. And I'm like, do you not know the power you have? All you have to say is that's not acceptable. And there have been people who used COVID, regardless of what side they were on, to attack and bully people. And good people around them stood by and said nothing. And that has to stop.
Indeed. And I mean, I had this discussion with somebody else today in a slightly different vein. And I don't know whether you want to get into it or not, but I mean, there is an entity out there called An Garda Síochána. And there's an element within that organization who assume levels of authority and power over others that they do not have. And unfortunately, a lot of people are willing to accept that sort of behavior from those individuals, and they don't have that authority, full stop. And it is a very sad affair, but I do have to take my hat off to you, Lisa, for the way you have handled them and other entities within the, what you might call the system, who assume levels of authority that are way beyond reason, they're way beyond common sense, and they're certainly in the not compliant with the simple principle of harming no one or their property. There is a culture out there of assumed authority. That's what I'd call it. And it needs to be cracked wide open, because no man or woman has any real authority over another.
Well,
and it's not about people being equal. That's not the right term. It's about we all have the same value, whether we're equal or we're not equal.
Well, yeah, I mean, it is a big subject that would merit a longer discussion, Seamus, but on that, what I'd say is probably purposely they have developed a group of An Garda Síochána who, the way that they are trained and the way that they are worked and the way that it is set up in seniority, it is an absolute fertile ground for the lowest common denominators in society to wear a uniform and be the worst that they can be and be supported by the tacit, the tacitity, the quiet, the facilitation of the others who will call themselves the good guards. And the one thing, if I was ever appointed to be commissioner, apart from giving them decent uniforms, not the Scanger shell suits they've just been put into, but I would actually say with ethics is, if there are members of An Garda Síochána that are acting like criminals and thugs and worse, and they are in a unit of 12 and 13, and it is discovered that that behavior is ongoing, that I would fire the rest of the unit for not reporting them and facilitating it, and then I'd imprison the other 2 or 3. Until the good people stand up and stop the bad ones, they are as bad as them, and if not worse. And that goes for solicitors as well, who will say, oh, I'm a good solicitor. And you say, have you ever been in court, say in the family law where nobody's watching, and watched bad solicitors behave almost criminally? And they'll say, yes, but I'm a good solicitor. And then you ask, how many have you reported? And they'll say no. An Garda Síochána, and my daughter said this one time when we were told by a chief superintendent that we had dealt with a bad egg. If the entire units support that, then you've got a rotten omelette. And I think at the moment, An Garda Síochána, possibly by design, is one of the most dangerous criminal gangs in this country. And they also don't seem to have the intelligence to realize that what they have been used for in the last 2 years is ultimately going to destroy them as well, and their families and their children. Just because they got an extra amount of power or more overtime, or the big check came in bigger, they will pay for what they are doing and what they have done. And I would hope at some point the good and decent guards will stand up and say no.
Absolutely, but it's mandatory, and it's the assumption by entities that they have power over other people. And I mean, I think that there is no rule of law, and there are rules, all right, for some, and then there are no rules for others. But there is a simple rule of law which needs to be adhered to at every level in society. Yeah. And that is, harm no one or their property. And it undoes so much baloney.
Absolutely.
It makes life so simple. It's just unreal. But
yeah. And I remember you saying that to me, that those lines, do no harm and take no one's property, you know, and property even being their good name, their dignity, their time, their faith. I mean, it's children. Yeah. But I think we leave it on that note, because I think that is a great note to leave it, Seamus, and you have to have your dinner. Do no harm and take no one's property. Yeah. And thank you. We've been having these wonderful conversations for 2 years now, and I thought it's a great opportunity to share them with people, because people are lonely and disconnected. And I just thought, you know, we're not trying to change the world here, but we're just showing 2 friends talking without an agenda and not being afraid to say what needs to be said. So thank you for your friendship. Bye, Seamus. Thank you.
Thank you.